All right. Welcome back to the channel. Andre Ward attacks new media and claims that Errol Spence needs Terence Crawford to be considered an all-time great. Let's talk about those two subjects together because they are closely related to one another. Let's do that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. I hope my title got your attention. Andre Ward attacks new media. That is a sensational title that gets your attention. But do you know what it also is? It's the truth. He claims Errol Spence needs Terence Crawford to be an all-time great. That may be spectacular, but it's also true. So when Andre Ward, and I am not new media, I do not interview fighters, I do not stick cameras in people's faces. But when Andre Ward warns fighters not to talk to YouTube channels that know that they can make money off the back of fighters by sticking cameras in their face, I have to assume that Andre Ward is telling boxers everywhere not to interview with new media. That may sound sensational, but it also is true. Now, why do I say it like that? Because Andre Ward took his foot and shoved it as far to the back of his throat as he could. Okay? Not just in his mouth, but dang near down to his tonsils when he talked about Errol Spence Jr. and Crawford. Look, man, and let me try to be as blunt as I can. Andre Ward is an expert at boxing inside the ring. An expert. When I listened to his explanation that he started off his interview with, I was, as always, immensely impressed, extremely happy that I get to listen to what a mind like Andre Ward has to say about fighting in a boxing ring. However, once you step out of that boxing ring, you are outside of that boxing ring, and you, like everybody else, becomes a human being. And everything outside of that exists within the human experience. And despite the fact that you may not have ever stepped inside of the ring, that doesn't mean that you've never dealt with liars before, that you've never dealt with thieves before, that you've never dealt with con men before, that you've never seen people mistreated, that you've never seen things that you would consider to be motivated by the color of someone's skin. We all as human beings have a life. And we all have 24 hours in the day, and we are taking in information all of those hours, all of those minutes, all of those seconds. So just because you are not a boxer, that does not mean that you can't tell when somebody doesn't want to make a fight, or when you can't work out the numbers and figure out what the math is and determine exactly who wants to make what fight because of what amount of money can be earned. And in fact, when people talk about the business of boxing, because they say that often, that boxing is a business. No, Mr. Ward, it is not. Boxing is a sport, and business is business. And the complex relationships that exist between the parties in a business transaction, that is just business. It is not boxing. So when we talk about Terence Crawford avoiding fighters, when we talk about ESPN not putting black fighters on pound for pound lists, when we say all those things and we press fighters to get fights that we want, it is because we have standing in the game, maybe not in the ring, but many people in the ring have standing in the game. And Andre, your experience inside the ring does not negate other people's experiences and observations outside the ring. And you used to understand that, but you don't, for some strange reason, understand it now. Because you say you don't respect that. People that put sensational titles and give their opinions about boxing, you don't respect that. Well, let me tell you, Mr. Ward, like you told Barbershop Conversations, I never asked you to respect me. I do not care if you respect me. I do not care if you agree with me. My opinion is my opinion, and I will share it. And people will gauge the value of my opinion based on their opinions. That's how it works. And you used to know that when you celebrated Boxing Ego for going to the gyms in California and sitting down and talking to the fighters. That's what Andre Ward said when he was a fighter, when he was coming out and getting prepared for the Sergey Kovalev fights. That's what you said about new media. When new media was there, and I'm not new media, but when new media was there representing you and supporting you and getting information out about the things that Sergey Kovalev said, getting things out there about the cheating that you were accused of that we did not believe that you engaged in. When you were having issues and 2-year layoffs, it was the new media channels that were saying you should be pound for pound. Should we have been ignored then, Mr. Ward? Or should we just be ignored now? Do you ignore everybody when they don't agree with what you say, or they misinterpret, or they have a different view than you do? Do you ignore them then? And do you only accept them when they say things that benefit you? Because that's what it seems like to me when in 2017 you can compliment them for helping you out, but when they're out here working hard trying to help other people out, you got something bad to say. And you will be judged by that. Why? Because that is not something that takes place inside the boxing ring. That is something that people deal with outside the boxing ring. And I assure you, sir, at 51 years, I have at least 13 years of experience dealing with liars, cheaters, and sometimes I was the liar, and sometimes I was the cheater. Sometimes I was the scammer. Sometimes I was the one being scammed. But through your life experiences, you learn. Just like you learn in the boxing ring, you learn outside the boxing ring. So, all of that, pump the brakes on it. Because this is just reality. We have a voice, we will use it. As to the point of his video, where he said that Errol Spence needs Terence Crawford, and you know that Terence Crawford wants to fight, but we don't know about Errol Spence. Well, sir, your interview was 4 days ago that I'm referring to now because I wanted to wait some time and make sure that not a bunch of people were doing videos about it. I wanted to be unique, and I wanted to bring it out when the time was right. And now the time is right, because just last night, Terence Crawford asked for a 60-40 in his favor split against Errol Spence Jr., the guy that you yourself said had the ace card, because he has a bunch of fights that he can make and Terence Crawford does not. So we will now see, with Terence Crawford having said that, whether Andre Ward is going to tell the truth, which is that is silly. For you to think you're getting 60-40 over the guy that's holding all the ace cards, and I'm using Andre Ward's own language. If Errol Spence has the ace card, he's got all the other guys that he can fight, all the other options that he has in his hand, which is what is that called, Andre? That's called a BATNA. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. That's not boxing. That's a negotiation term. That's not boxing. That's my area. That's not yours. So, BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement for Errol Spence is to fight somebody else and make the same money. Terence Crawford's BATNA is what? To continue to work for Bob Arum, who don't want him, and fight a bunch of guys that people don't want to see him fight. That's his BATNA. Who has the better alternative to a negotiated agreement? Who has the best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Errol Spence Jr. does, without a doubt, and that is not boxing. I never had to walk into a ring to see that, and I can put as salacious a headline as I want, and it still remains to be true. Don't blame people because they want to put titles out there that will draw people to their channel, because if they do not, people will not watch. That's how it goes. Guess what? Who else does that? ESPN does that, and you don't fix them. When you vote for Monster Inoue on a pound-for-pound list, but Gervonta Davis is not there, do you think that I really believe that you believe that, Andre Ward? No, I do not believe that you believe that. I don't. I believe you're a company man that works for ESPN and is doing your best to do your job, and every once in a while, doing your job runs you contrary to people that want what they want. But to discredit people who you credited before, just because you don't like their stance now, when you liked their stance before, is patent horse boo-boo, and you know it. That's my opinion. Oh, and also, does Terence Crawford need Errol Spence need Terence Crawford to be an all-time great? No, he does not. You know why? Because he can go fight Canelo Alvarez, and if he beats Canelo Alvarez, nobody's going to doubt that he's an all-time great, because Canelo Alvarez is a viable fight for him, and Terence Crawford, because Terence Crawford is asking for 60-40 in his favor, is not. Now, I bet you money that if Errol Spence fights Canelo Alvarez, Errol Spence will take 60-40 with Canelo Alvarez, and Canelo Alvarez will not ask him to fight for a penny less. In fact, he might give him 55-45, because since Floyd Mayweather Jr., he's the only dude that has deserved it like that, more so than Gennady Golovkin, because Gennady Golovkin did not hold down pay-per-views on his own, and Errol Spence Jr. did. And again, that is negotiations. That's not boxing in the boxing ring. My friends, stay out of that, because you are not expert at that. I am. You talk about what you see in the ring. You leave everybody else and what they talk about outside the ring, dude, they just as good as you are, because everybody has those experiences. That's my opinion. You have yours. Let me know what it is in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.